Good afternoon. I'm Andy Agathangelo, the founder of the Transparency Task Force. The Transparency Task Force is a certified social enterprise, which simply means that we exist to make an impact, not to make a profit. We're looking to make an impact in the financial services sector. We believe that the financial industry is profoundly important to the well-being of society, to economic stability, and also to political stability as well. But we also think that the financial industry has a predisposition to misbehave. And to be more specific, it has a predisposition to misbehave when it's allowed to. And the organizations who are there to prevent the financial sector misbehaving are the financial regulators. And we believe, unfortunately, that many financial regulators around the world are failing to carry out one of their most important duties, which is to protect consumers from harm. And I'd like to emphasize that point because that really is what today's session is all about. You'll all be aware that hundreds, thousands of business owners have been missold toxic, dangerous products they should never have been missold to by the banks. There's no question that the banks missold those products. Nobody is standing up saying that the banks were justified in doing it. Despite that, and despite a £7 million investigation carried out by John Swift QC, the Financial Conduct Authority, which is the primary conduct authority in the UK for the financial sector, has thus far refused to open up the possibility of people who are not yet compensated having a chance to get that compensation. Let's think about that for a moment. What we effectively have here is a conduct regulator charged by Parliament, by society, with the responsibility of helping to ensure good conduct in the financial industry, choosing not to help victims of mis-selling by the banks to get the compensation that they so obviously deserve. And as a consequence of that, you, me, everybody here today, many others as well, are running around trying to raise money to support a judicial review that frankly should never have to happen. The moral basis for the FCA's position on this matter is absolutely non-existent. Whether they think they've got some kind of legal case, I do not know. But I'm absolutely sure that they are morally bankrupt. And that's the significance of why this is also important, everybody, because if we have a conduct regulator unable to distinguish between right and wrong, then what is the basis of having confidence they can do their job properly in regulating a financial industry that clearly struggles quite often to understand the difference between right and wrong? To my mind, personally, the judicial review is not just about the IRHP mis-selling scandal. It's also about the legitimacy and the efficacy of the Financial Conduct Authority itself. That is why, ladies and gentlemen, I think we ought to do all we possibly can to support this judicial review, to help it with the funding, whether that's by giving money personally or just going nuts raising awareness of it. We have to do all that we can, because we will never have the society that we want if we do not have a financial sector that is serving of society. And we cannot have a financial sector that is serving society if we do not have a conduct regulator willing and able to help ensure that the market behaves the way that the market should. And absolutely, unequivocally, if or when the market does misbehave, the financial regulator, the FCA, ought to enforce properly, ought to help prosecutions happen where appropriate for that to be the case. And of course, should not allow themselves to be lobbied by the banks and even the Treasury to perhaps suggest they should limit the redress of the compensation payments that would otherwise be eligible to the people involved. So this is a remarkably important, if you like, David versus Goliath moment. We have us lot, the all-party parliamentary group on fair business banking, which is running the judicial review. Hausfeldt's the law firm that's actually dealing with the legalities of the case and so on. We really must all stand together and do the best that we can to fight against a conduct authority that, frankly, is displaying once again that it is morally bankrupt. And I am happy to go on the record to state that if we have a financial conduct authority that struggles to really get its head around the difference between right and wrong, then what is its legitimacy to operate? It's more than just the IRHP scandal that's on trial here, or will be on trial here. It's the legitimacy of the FCA to continue as the UK's primary conduct regulator. Therefore, I'd like to stress once again, I'm remarkably pleased and proud that we've been able to put this event together at relatively short notice. I'm very, very pleased that the event has been so well attended. This is very, very important stuff. We've got a lot to cram in a relatively short period of time, folks. And what I'm going to do first of all is I'm just going to show you the event's webpage, and I'm going to play you a short video. It's actually a recording. It's a recording of Kevin Hollinrake MP, chair or co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on fair business banking. It's Kevin on Sky TV. We'll get to that in just a moment. But let me just share my screen and show you the speakers that we have. So we have Fiona Sheriff with Athena Foundation, which is very heavily supporting of the IRHPgate that I just mentioned. It is the secretariat for it. Andy Keats, CEO of SME Alliance, Ian Lightbody, Andy Candy. Then we've got Rachel and Simon and Ned from Hausfeldt's, the law firm that is helping to drive this forward. We've got the video of Kevin Hollinrake talking to Sky TV.
Our group of MPs has stepped up a legal fight over the city regulator's decision not to widen a compensation scheme for businesses missold billions of pounds worth of loans by some of Britain's biggest banks. The all-party parliamentary group on fair business banking has sent a letter before action to the Financial Conduct Authority seeking a judicial review of its handling of the redress programme. Well, Kevin Hollinrake is the co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on fair business banking, and he joins me now, or rather he was about to. Is he there? He is there. Kevin, good to see you this morning. My heart skipped a beat there. Look, for people not familiar with this saga, when did this alleged mis-selling take place?
Really late 2000s, just before the financial crisis and afterwards. So, you know, I mean, this was another banking scandal. You know, these banks knew that interest rates were going to fall, yet they sold these products that kept in their interest rates high. And also it meant a big breakage cost. So it prevented lots of businesses from rebroking their finances and moving elsewhere. So it killed lots and lots of businesses. And that's why the review scheme was put in place. But arbitrarily, the FCA decided, after lobbying by the banks and indeed the Treasury, to make a limit on what size of business could enter the scheme. So lots of people were left without justice and compensation.
And as far as you're concerned, this was down to political leaning on the regulator then not to pay out?
Well, it's not me saying that. That's in the review. So the FCA commissioned a review of the scheme. Jonathan Swift did that review and established that there was lobbying by the banks and indeed the Treasury itself to limit the scope of the scheme. And that was purely to save the banks money. And they knew it would exclude lots and lots of businesses, about 5,000 businesses, 10,000 sales of swaps. We think at least £2 or £3 billion of compensation that's not been awarded to lots of SMEs. And these people's lives were devastated. Many people lost their businesses, lost their homes. Some people inevitably lost their lives through that process, because if you're in business, your business is everything to you. So devastating consequences and treated as collateral damage, in my view, just absolutely inappropriately.
And do you think you are going to succeed in getting this judicial review?
Well, we hope so. We've got a fundraising campaign. We need to raise the money to do it. Housefeld, the legal firm, are helping us with this, and but we do need to try and secure the funds to be able to do this. But very much hope so. We can take the action forward, and also that we'll get a positive judgment in the case. I mean, the FCA, it cost £7 million to commission this review. It took 2 years to do it. The central recommendation by the very renowned QC, John Swift, who conducted the review, was to widen the scope of the scheme. And the same day they received the report, the FCA simply dismissed that recommendation, totally inappropriately, in my view. I mean, his words were their decision to limit the scheme was not consistent with the standards of a skilled regulator. I find it hard to see how they can not widen the scope of the scheme on that basis. So let's hope the judge agrees with us.
All right, Kevin. Hopefully see you again in future to talk about this. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
I think Kevin did an absolutely superb job there to get the message across in such a succinct way. He hit every single one of the important points there. I know Kevin's not here, but let's show our appreciation. Oh, excuse me. Let's show our appreciation to Kevin and the APPG for the work that it's been doing to bring this whole matter forward. Thank goodness the APPG on fair business banking is there, because if it wasn't, where would we be? Where would we be? Okay, let's go straight to Ned and his colleagues at Housefeld. So Ned, if you'd like to take yourself off mute, and Rachel and Simon, if you're there as well, please spend the next 10 minutes or so helping everybody to really understand what a judicial review is, why there's a case for it here, and anything else that you'd like to share. Over to you guys. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andy, and thanks everybody for joining. It's fantastic. We're going to do this in 2 short parts. I'm just going to give a quick overview, and then Simon will talk a little bit more about the legal issues we're looking at and what's going to happen next in the JR. So, when we read the Swift report on the 14th of December, we read it with interest because at Housefeld we have done a lot of interest rate swap cases and worked a lot on regulation. And it is just damning of the FSA's action since 2013. And Swift goes into a huge amount of detail and says that the FSA was not entitled to discriminate between the customers it was due to protect. And if it was, it needed to consult and weigh up the pros and cons, and it didn't do that. So he says quite clearly that it was unlawful, and I remember reading it this morning. That morning I just couldn't believe it. The FCA responded that same day to say they weren't going to change anything, and we now know that was a decision taken in September 2021, but they didn't publicise it until the report actually came out. So they had made that decision 3 months previously. For a judicial review, what we need to do is find a decision which has happened within 3 months, and we can therefore ask a High Court judge to rule that it's unlawful. So we're not able to review what happened back in 2013, but we can review the FCA's decision on the 14th of December 2021. So that's what we're doing. We have been writing on behalf of the APPG since then. We put together a very detailed letter of claim on the 8th of February. We do a response to that today. Haven't got it yet. It will be very interesting to see what they say. They may ask for more time. The deadline for issuing the judicial review is the 13th of March, because we have to do it within 3 months of the decision we're looking to quash. And that's an absolutely hard deadline. We are all working very hard towards that. Simon and I are speaking to Kevin and Heather at the APPG daily to put together all the documents we need. We have instructed counsel. And if we can get the funding we need, we are going to run it to trial. And we consider we have a very good prospect of getting a declaration that the FCA acted unlawfully. We will then have to see what ruling the judge makes, and probably the harder part of it is what is the FCA actually going to be ordered to do. I don't want to step on what Simon's going to talk about the legal issues. So I'll just talk a little bit about the fundraising. I think we began fundraising just over a week ago. We've currently got 50 donations, over £25,000, which is absolutely brilliant. We're looking to get to at least £100,000, ideally £200,000. That probably sounds like quite a lot, but this is really a heavyweight piece of litigation. The FCA, we expect, will fight it very hard. It's done that in the past. It would be a case which would make law on the FCA's remit and responsibilities and how it can exercise its discretion. So it really is, like Andy said, a David versus Goliath battle. We've got approval from our kind of management to run it, so we never charge more than 25% of our fees. So it's going to be making a loss all the way through, but we just need something in the pot for out-of-pocket expenses, something for council and something for us. So we've kind of tried to get the minimum we could to keep the lights on, and still making this viable. So that is where we're hoping to get to. I'm really hopeful we're going to get there, because it's been a week and we've done brilliantly so far. I know everybody is speaking to lots of people, and lots of people on this call have been really, really helpful, reaching out for fundraising or contributing directly themselves. So I am hopeful and optimistic we will all go forward, issue the claim on the 13th of March, and then fight it through the courts. I think I'll stop there, hand over to Simon, and after Simon has spoken, we're both happy to take questions, because I'm sure people would like to ask, and we're very happy to talk for as long as needed. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ned. And just to echo Ned's comments, it's really great to see so many of you on the call today, and a big thank you to Andy, who's just been doing an excellent job in organising these events and coordinating what is a big group of interested people in the proceedings and these very, very difficult issues. As Ned said, we've exchanged pre-action correspondence with the FCA. We sent off our what's called a letter before action, which is a very detailed letter setting out why we think we have a legal basis to seek a judicial review of the FCA's decision. We expect a response to that today, and there may be some flex in terms of time if they come to us and ask for more, and obviously we'll have to deal with that when we get to it. Ned referred to the powerful conclusions in the Swift report, and I think just to give a bit of an explanation as to why we have constructed the claim so far as we have, there was a particular conclusion in relation to the sophistication test and the extent to which that excluded people from the scheme, which was especially powerful in terms of its legal consequences. And we have put that conclusion front and center of the challenge, because we feel that gives it the sort of strongest and clearest, most sniper-like shot at the issue. And effectively that allows us to examine the FCA's interpretation of what its regulatory remit was at the time. And we feel pretty strong on the fact that they've got that interpretation wrong. And if we can get the judge to agree with that, then obviously, as Ned said, we'll be in a position to obtain a court finding that the decision was unlawful. Obviously, the next stage and objective of the judicial review is to have some positive action flowing from that decision. And there are different permutations of how that might look. At present stage, we're only in the pre-action stage at the moment, and we're in the process of drafting and composing the full formulation of the case in the form of what's referred to as a statement of facts and grounds. So that's where we set out the pleaded case, all of the points that we will put to the FCA as to why we think their recent decision was unlawful. Just to explain some of the strategic thinking around focusing in on that sophistication test, we are also in a situation where we do have very limited abilities to look at the decisions of the FSA in 2013. The judicial review process is limited to that very recent decision. And so we need to be careful about what we're asking the court to look at, in case what we are asking them to look at starts to stray into the behaviour, the actions and the decisions of the FCA and other bodies much further back into time. So we're looking at that very carefully and making sure that we weigh it up appropriately and take it step by step so that we can be as strong a position as possible to get everybody who has been negatively affected by this into a position where there might be a route to redress. As Ned said, we've got to issue the proceedings on the 13th of March on or before. We are starting to do some of the preliminary work on that, notwithstanding that obviously we need to get our funding target in order to proceed with that. There was a question earlier on, I think from Abhishek, in relation to counsel instructed, and we have Thomas Rowe QC, who's a administrative law expert, and Anna Lindner, who is a swaps expert. She's worked on lots and lots of swaps cases, so we've got a really good counsel team on this. Both of whom are working speculatively at the moment as well. And just to echo the comments that Ned and Andy have made, that we have a strong belief in the case. We really need to get to that funding target so that we've got a basis upon which to take what is a big piece of litigation through to a trial, and we're expecting it to be hotly contested, which is an extremely disappointing expectation in light of the comments Andy has made. We're talking about the regulator of a financial services sector that we are all part of. So it is very disappointing that we have to expect and plan for a hot contest from the FCA, but we expect that's what will happen. So we welcome all the support that comes from all of you and all of your contacts. And as Ned said, we would really welcome any questions today or in the coming weeks as we get closer to that deadline and as we get closer to hopefully taking the case forward. So thank you, Andy.
Thank you very much indeed, Simon, and thank you also, Ned. That's great. So we'll go to kind of Q&A territory to cover off the, if you like, the legal dimension to all of this. There really is a remarkably knowledgeable group here today, and frankly, I've just been blown away by the knowledge of many of the members of this community that are gathering around this issue, not just the lawyers, but others as well. It really is great. So I'll go to what's called gallery view so I can see everybody. Wave a hand at me, either digitally or otherwise, if you would like to come in at this point with a comment or a question for Simon or Ned. And if there aren't, I'll chuck in one or two myself. Mr. Stephen Barker, then we'll go to Mark Bishop. Thank you, Stephen.
Well, whilst we've got Ned and Simon sort of on the stage, is it the case that Thomas Rowe QC was leading counsel for the two cases that you referred to or are referred to on page 2, para 9 of the pre-action letter? That's Pakistani Airlines, the Times Travel, and I've forgotten the other one now, just bear with me. Anyway, my point is, and were Housefields also involved in both those cases?
So I was involved in both those cases.
Good man.
Yeah,
well, that's fine.
Yep.
Stay there, Ned. Just a minute. So it's cut across you.
Yep.
So my question is, how did the IRHPgate fund both those cases?
Sure. So I was involved in both in my previous firm, Times Travel. I then completed when I moved across to Housefield. Tom was my leader on Times Travel. I had somebody else on the first one on Marex. Those were purely pro bono, but an intervention is different from being, the claimant in a JR. It's just a much bigger job.
So it's harder to get pro bono at Housefield than it is at Aviva firm, basically.
It's really not. Housefield is doing a lot pro bono, but it's a different...
Can we just get Leanne on here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, Stephen, it can't be underestimated the potential scale of the judicial review that we're proposing. Just to give a comparator, I'm engaged currently in a separate judicial review claim against a government department, and costs on both sides are nearing the £800,000 mark, and it has taken up a team in Housefield of 4 lawyers for a period of about 14 months. using quite a lot of their time across that and other cases that we've got workloads on. And it's important to make that clear, I think, because it is a big undertaking to pursue a judicial review, and that is, as Ned has said, a different prospect to intervening in court proceedings, which your interventions aren't usually contested, and you'll usually have your submissions heard, and that's effectively it. Whereas we will be fighting this case against the FCA throughout, and that really is a different proposition. But as we said, I hope is clear, we are looking to do this on a basis that the firm isn't going to be making any money; it's going to be making a loss. We won't ever be charging more than 25% of our rates. We're doing that because we strongly believe in the case, and we have a long history in fighting the interest rate swap cases, and we know the community well, and we've managed to convince the wider firm to do it on that basis. But it is that we're just looking for that effectively an absolute bottom line of funds that can assist with the firm with the disbursement costs, so that the council can operate with any additional costs and the possible need to get adverse cost insurance in place. That's why we have arrived where we have.
Before we go to Mark Bishop, then to Paul Carlier, I just want us all to sort of stop and think for a moment. Trying to find any competent law firm to take on the FCA and, in effect, the British banking system and, in effect, the Treasury, because we know from the Swift review that the Treasury, as well as the banks, lobby the FCA to get their way, to basically get the FCA to limit the amount of compensation that would be paid. Trying to find any law firm that could competently do that is in and of itself pretty damn miraculous. And finding one that's actually willing to do it on below commercial rates and expose itself to significant risk is pretty damn remarkable. And I think one of the reasons that's happened is because of the existing relationship between Hausfeldt and the IRHPgate that Kevin Hollinrake runs. I very, very much doubt if this would have happened had that relationship not been there. So much of this stuff actually does come down to relationships. And I think we're very, very lucky that there's a law firm that's willing and able to do this. And I think, if you don't mind, I'm certainly happy to publicly show my support for Hausfeldt. And if you'd like to join me in doing so, please do. Now's a good time to do it. Well done, Hausfeldt, and thank goodness you're there. Mr. Mark Bishop, over to you.
Okay, so thank you, Andy. I have a quick question for Ned and Simon, and perhaps any other lawyers on the call. And it's this: somebody asked a question in the chat, which was, what happens if we don't reach the 100k threshold for the judicial review? I suppose that also the question is, what happens if it's unsuccessful? And Ned said there might be wider breach of statutory duty claims against the FCA. I'd be interested to know a bit more about those. For example, who would be bringing the claims? Would there be any Limitation Act concerns? What would be the cost of bringing those claims? What would be the likely returns from doing so, or possible returns? What downsides or upsides are there to this course of action? And is there any way that this course of action could be pursued even if the judicial review has happened, whether the JI is successful or unsuccessful?
Do you want me to kick off? Yeah, I mean, we haven't thought these through in detail because they're pretty hard. I think they would probably go back to 2013. So we're going to come up against limitation periods. It's a novel cause of action. And in reality, I mean, we work a lot with litigation funders, and there's clearly a very big claim here if we're looking at compensation of 1 to 3 billion, which hasn't been paid. But the litigation risks are tough. So I don't think myself a claim like that could be commercially funded. So I know we have been thinking about it, and others have been thinking about it. But for me, it's going to be really, really hard to get off the ground unless you have somebody who is willing, to fund what is a pretty tricky claim. I think the one thing that would make that possible would be if we had a High Court judge saying, actually, this was unlawful. And if then what transpired isn't satisfactory, that would be a good starting point, or a much better starting point for a claim like that.
I think just to add to that, Mark, the one thing that we must remember throughout the process is what might happen with disclosure, because there are disclosure obligations in the judicial review, and we have in our pre-action correspondence made some very specific requests for documents, all of which we say pertain to the decision that we're challenging, and we'll see what response we get. But the more what the FCA is required to disclose to discharge its disclosure obligations is different and much more detailed than any other attempts to get information and documents out of the FCA. So it may be that process is helpful in informing us if and how those more creative, difficult types of claim might be funded, might be attractive to a funder, and ultimately might be pursued. But I think there's a bit of a way to go on that. And as Ned said, really, we just haven't done the thinking on that. And you do have to do a bit of creative thinking to get there.
Thanks, guys. Just before we go to Paul Carlier, I want to just pick up on one point that's already been mentioned, this idea that the FCA spent, forgive me if I got the number wrong, is it £7 million on the John Swift QC review? That's a lot of money. £7 million of money that was spent on the review, and the primary conclusion from the review was that the FCA should reopen the redress scheme and start helping banks to, or start making banks to pay out compensation. It really is pretty nuts that that's actually happened, isn't it? It just all, to my mind, it does all seem as though there's a lot of collusion going on behind the scenes between the banks and the Treasury, etc. The Transparency Task Force issued an open letter on the 7th of Feb. I'll put a link into the chat. You can read it for yourselves if you haven't already seen it. And it's basically about that point, the failure to act on the findings of the investigation that you commissioned. So the letter went to all the non-exec directors at the FCA: Liam Coleman, Bernadette Conroy, Jeanette Lichner, Richard Lloyd, Alice Maynard, Tommaso Velletti, Sam Woods, and Charles Randell, who's the current chair. And the letter's all about this very point. The non-exec directors of the FCA commissioned an investigation, and then, despite the fact that it cost £7 million, chose to completely and utterly ignore it. One has to wonder what the forces going on behind the scenes are to create a dynamic like that. It doesn't seem healthy to me. It really doesn't. Mr. Paul Carlier, whose camera isn't working. Paul, as always, I'll ask you to be as succinct as possible. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, no, so I'm the only one that gets that warning. I don't know why my camera's not working, but there are 4 points I'd like to just raise.
Go for it.
The FCA themselves have in some respects already confirmed that the scheme was wrong. Their whole argument for deploying it the way they did was just that they were actually acknowledging that it wasn't right. It was just under these circumstances and the time and everything else, we deemed that this was the way to go. So by definition, they are actually saying that this was not certainly not the only alternative, and probably not the best overall. So, surely that has to help. The other 3 points are the use of counsel that have been involved in prior IRHP litigation. I've got grave concerns about prior IRHP litigation, or at least the ones that have been allowed to go to trial and judgment by the banks, primarily because they knew the pleadings were wrong or flawed, or knew that there was an undisclosed conflict of interest that would make their victory highly likely. So, I think the whole issue of the existing case law needs to be looked at, because most of it is flawed. Mars versus HBOS and Crestsign are disturbingly flawed. And obviously at some point that's going to come into it. Swift mentioned it in his report. He failed to mention, he incredibly included reference to and relies upon Crestsign and Mars, and doesn't mention any of the evidence I gave him to show that these were completely disturbing and potentially the result of perjury or perverting the course of justice. So, and that brings me on to the other things that Swift excluded from the report. I mean, not just that, but the credit lines. I know Steve's put it in the chat. I mean, these credit lines were a massive issue, and they're the difference, if you like, between if you include credit lines into the equation, the whole thing becomes fraud, not mis-selling. And it's quite clear to me that's why one of the reasons why they are excluded from the entire IRHP review scheme. I've got the documents that determine what the skilled person should look for in the Lloyd's review, and there's no mention of credit lines. And I think that was by design. So, are these things going to sort of be dropped in? But my primary concern is the case law and council issue, because I mean, I'd like the opportunity to explain a few things on that with Ned, Simon, and council, if that's at all possible.
Thank you, Paul. Paul, by the way, there's a very strong chance that somehow we're going to find space in our calendars next week for a similar event to this. So there may well be a chance to do that. I'll come back to you on that point myself in due course. But Ned, Simon, anything you'd like to bounce back on what Paul just said?
I mean, just to say that we are collating all the comments, including Paul's helpful ones, and about to send council a very long list of everything else that they should be thinking about. In terms of credit lines and consequential losses, there's kind of an important concept, which is getting the FCA to revise the decision to exclude the customers of 9 banks who were excluded, and saying the FCA should go further and, for example, look at customers of banks who were not within the review, or look at consequential losses which weren't dealt properly. And that's not the primary grounds of the review, but we absolutely want to include it. And we have included it in the letter of claim, and we're going to be clarifying that in the particulars of claim. And the grounds for that will be, in 2013, the FSA had massively underestimated the scale of IRHP mis-selling. And now that they know the true scale, there's much more reason to revisit that. And it's a bit trickier. And being frank, there's a tension between asking the judge for something that's narrower. I mean, you've got more chance for success versus wider, and it's harder. But we will be definitely bringing other banks' consequential losses and some of these other matters kind of into play as much as we can.
Great.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Ned. That's great. Simon, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, well, just to Paul's comment in relation to council and existing case law. I mean, and I think that Paul, that was possibly being raised in response to us using council who have experience in the interest rate swap selling arena. The particular barrister that we're talking about and our expertise, none of us actually acted on any of the cases that we're talking about, and obviously we've all been engaged in these sorts of cases for some time now. What the expertise that the specialist barrister that we're working with on this case does have is a lot of knowledge around the regulatory position. And really, as a starting point, our challenge here is, and this is subject to what Ned has just said, obviously what we're trying to do is to broaden the scope of this as we move forward. But the primary challenge is in relation to what we say is an incorrect interpretation as to the regulatory purview of the FSA at the time. And so it is for that reason that we are very pleased to be working with an excellent barrister who has a great deal of experience and knowledge, expertise in this field, and who is doing so at the moment on a sort of speculative basis. I don't think it is anything to be concerned about that there will be some kind of pollution of their analysis, their expertise, as regards the way in which some of the case law has developed, which I agree is disappointing. And in the early days of these cases, the cases that the banks allowed to go to trial were not the best cases. They were not the most well-argued cases, and it was in the early days of actually the fullness of the knowledge required to make the arguments necessary. But we don't feel at all concerned about that polluting how we're proceeding with this, and hopefully that gives you some sort of reassurance that we're okay on that front.
Very,
Okay,
very,
great.
very good indeed. This is once again a very content-rich session. Really pleased with everybody's input to it. Thank you very much indeed, Ned and Simon. Can we please show our appreciation to Ned and Simon before we pass over to Andy Candy? Thank you very much, Ned. Thank you, Simon. Mr. Andy Candy, over to you. Andy, not everybody will know you, so if you wouldn't mind, please just start off briefly with an explanation as to why this horrible, horrible subject has entered your life and what it's meant to you, and please add in anything else you'd like to. We're pretty much on track, so if you can keep it just a few minutes, that would be superb, Andy. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll keep it very short. I was missold a swap in 2008, was an initial one to report it to the FSA through the Ombudsman, and have been embroiled in it ever since then, through the misconduct of the regulator and, quite frankly, outright criminal conduct by the bank. And as it seems now, by the regulator, by the FCA, FSA and HM Treasury. I've got a couple of slides just to share with you, if that's all right, which are very quick, because I totally agree that the narrow frame of the judicial review in terms of where it's being focused, but obviously Paul's picked up on the credit line, and it's also important to refer to it as margin credit, not just credit, for a variety of reasons. Now, Bank Confidential, Mark Wright and Steve Middleton have issued a letter to SWIFT, which he's got until I think Monday next week to respond to, following which I believe, dependent on his response or ignoring of it, they're going to make that publicly available. I'm been given permission to make that available to Ned and Simon and various others, the IRHPgate, so that they can have a look at the detail of it now. But it's a forensic dissection of SWIFT's report in relation to this particular issue. And goes to the very heart of the fraud that's been perpetrated from day one, which obviously has relevancy not just to the people included in the scheme, but also those excluded from the scheme. Because you could win the JR, but how are you going to approach the losses and the redress and everything that arises from that? Now, SWIFT, unbelievably, do I just share screen, Andy?
Yeah, good. You should be good to go. Thank you.
So effectively, on the left is COBS 14.3.2R. I've noted that on the left on the handbook, if you go online, you can check this yourselves, just set the handbook to the date on the left. If you look down to the bottom, you'll see I've circled D, any margin requirements or similar obligations applicable to designated investments of that type. If you look at the column on the right, this is the rule as rendered on page 64 of a supposedly respected QC's 2-year £7 million report. He's missed off number D. No reasonable explanation for that whatsoever. Utterly astonishing. When this was pointed out to me, I nearly fell off my chair. Now, if you do a search on Swift's report, bearing in mind it's 500 pages, the word margin doesn't appear once. That's not a mistake. That's not an oversight. It's not negligence. So a report which conveniently for the FCA and banks never mentions margin, margin credit, margin requirements or similar, and I use the word obligations, not contingent, but obligations. That's critical. Now, Swift has totally whitewashed this from his report. It's astonishing. Now, irrespective of this, it's referenced furthermore in COB 7, which is pre-MiFID. And you'll notice that I've taken this from Steve and Bank Confidential's letter, but redacted bits of it because I'm just focusing, and Andy can make this available if people want to look at it, but I'll send the full letter to the rest of the guys. But COB rules clearly set out that if you were going to sell a product that required margin credit, you had to have prior notification in writing from the customer that they were prepared to accept the risk. So it then goes into COB 7.9. You can see there it says this section applies to firm when it lends money or grants credit. That's margin credit. Again, it's relevant to principle 6. And there it says, you'll see the text. Hopefully I can't quite see it on mine. The rules could not be any clearer. You must not lend money or provide credit to a customer to engage in investment business with your firm unless the customer is aware of the full extent of the risks and agrees to it. So margin lending for contingent liabilities. So this is where they totally conflate and misrepresent off the scale about what is actually the contingent liability and what is the obligation arising from this. They're effectively lending you money to take part in the activity in the first place. I know Steve gave examples of this on GP practices before, where he goes into those sorts of aspects of what's actually going on in that. But again, I can provide that to Hausfeld and that to look at in detail. So I know this is sort of slightly off kilter, but in terms of the technical aspect, this is something that very much needs to be looked into because it's relevant to those included and excluded from the scheme. So very briefly then, if I go down to the next one, so relevant actions and activities, obviously the judicial review, I've sort of noted that out there, and be interested to see Hausfeld's thinking on this, not necessarily here because there might not be time to go into it, and also they need to look at the detail of the letter. There's obviously the Treasury Select Committee session with John Swift on the 7th, and I'd be grateful, I'll be sending a copy to Kevin, but I think it's absolutely paramount that he raises this with Swift directly in the TSC session. Swift cannot be allowed to wriggle out of this. There's too many reviews, too many independent reviews supposedly of regulatory failure and capture and bank misconduct that's been allowed to, carry on without being addressed. And the TSC have an absolutely critical opportunity to time down and question him on this. Separately, I think that the evidence that's contained in this letter demands a backbench debate being brought forward on this matter, particularly where people can give evidence about it. There's Paul Carlier, various others, Abhishek, who have absolutely clear evidence of this and what's gone on. And this really needs to be brought into the spotlight, even in as much as alongside the JR and bringing another spotlight to it to add the pressure. Finally, just briefly, the lowballing tapes, Andy Verity, 28th of February, Radio 4, bound to be astonishing. It absolutely ties into the mis-selling derivatives, the manipulation by the banks, the manipulation by the Bank of England and various others, inescapably linked to what we were all stitched up with. So sorry to rush through it. I know we're pressed for time. Hopefully I didn't babble too much. Yeah, and that's about it really.
You most certainly didn't babble at all, Andy, and I'm sure that you've just brought to the table some very, very important points and some very, very compelling evidence. Andy, if you don't mind, if you're happy to, please put your email into the chat, because there'll be several people on this call who won't have been aware of what you just outlined at all. It may well be that Simon and Ned and others want to pick up with you to better understand what you just set out in such a succinct way for us. Andy Canny, thank you very, very much indeed. Let's please show our appreciation to Andy before we go to our next speaker, and we'll have a bit of a Q&A session at the end of it all, okay, guys? So just hold your thoughts and questions until we get to the end. And I'm just going to look at my program to see who's the next speaker. It's Mr. Ian Lightbody. Ian, please introduce yourself and go for it. Thank you very much, Ian. Thank you.
Good afternoon, all. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ian Lightbody. I'm a victim of Clydesdale Bank, and in relation to all the hidden derivatives and margins and all the malfeasance that you've heard today, they are possibly, I think, the world record holders in relation to the size of the bank and the people that they've affected. My participation today is in respect of my association with the group, the BBRS Ineligible, which basically spun out at the end of 2000, the beginning of 2021, when it was obvious that the BBRS was a sham. We have two others today, Robert Chase and Tim Layton, who are present here today, and they are on the management group of the BBRS. Robert is a Handelsbanken victim, and Tim is HSBC, and then we have others, Allied Irish, we've got Dean Dye at the Zurich Dunbar, and we basically represent anyone who, for eligibility reasons and non-participating banks, that they must not be left behind. So firstly, I must thank you, Andy. You're quick to praise everybody else, but I think we, at some point, maybe at the end of this, that we can give you a round of applause. You never seem to get one, but the fact is that you are the cement in the wall, or the dike, as we say in Scotland, and you've brought together, I would imagine, quite a lot of groups, maybe even known as disparate groups, and for that we give you your heartfelt thanks.
Thank you.
Next, our thanks go to Hausfeldt and the IRHPgate for this course of action, which is certainly unprecedented in my time in fighting these malfeasant banks. We're most grateful that you Housefelds especially have not left anybody behind. They've included, for those of you who don't know this, in their pre-action letter they have included, and as they alluded there, Simon and Ned alluded earlier, they have included people who were not part of the original IRHP review, and for that we must thank them. Look, for those of you who don't know, there were only 9 banks participated in the 2013 review. Clydesdale, was at the bank where did participate in that, but they watered down the cases. Just to let you know, there were 2,300 eligible cases from Clydesdale, and they only reviewed 1,500, which was 65%, whereas the other banks reviewed 90+%. So they did everything they could to get out of it. And then there were basically 8,372 other loans, which are fixed rate loans, which were promised to be IRHPs, embedded, do you want to call them swaps? Depending on which audience they're talking to, they basically will tell them one thing or the other. But thanks to, for instance, Steve Middleton and who else we got? Mark Carley, for instance, Anne Abhishek and others, they've been banging on for years about these. None of us knew what these hidden derivatives were and these contingent liabilities. And thanks to Steve and others, that these are now coming to the fore and will prove that these so-called fixed rate loans, which were unregulated in the terms of the FCA, are now going to be scrutinised, and the fact that they had these regulated products attached to them. So thanks again to them. Anyway, as a bit of a background, I should explain that we as a group were doing something similar with 4 legal teams and QCs. We had analysed the SWIFT report, which I do believe cost 8.6 million. And if you read the SWIFT report, I don't know, the 7 million is maybe understated. Anyway, that apart, it's a whacking amount of money. But we were taking a similar approach, and we then became aware of the IRHPgate and Housefelds initiative. So we then started dialogue with them, and we have come in behind them with our support. But we are adamant that no one should be left behind in obtaining a fair review. And we are delighted that also now that the SME Alliance has, in the last couple of days, through Andy Keats, has endorsed our position strongly, and which will give great strength to a lot of people who believe that they could be left behind. So that is great. And thanks to Andy and his team for that. So we believe this is an opportunity that which none of us really believed was going to come after the BBRS. Which was a great failure. I believe personally the FCA, Treasury, Bank of England, everybody who's been involved in covering up this in the past will be looking closely at our fundraising experts. And I think that I personally took part in a webinar for the BBRS back in November 2020, and I used, as part of my presentation, which we all know what's happened since then, I used the post office scandal as an analogy. And I put up a post box on the second PowerPoint screen. And you can, tragic though it may be, this problem that we've got is far greater than the post office in relation to numbers and people affected. But we don't want to take away from obviously the impact of their campaign, but we must take strength in the fact that they've achieved this traction well before we've managed to do it. So, taking strength from that, we need your time, we need your talents, but most of all, we need your financial resources. As Ned said, we've now surpassed 25,000 from 51 donors, which is just an average roughly about £500, which is very strong. From my own efforts, and I am aware of considerably more that has been pledged, but on the basis that a solid platform is achieved by others, like ourselves. So people are watching and they've got their money there and they're ready to pledge. So I don't know if it's appropriate, but I think we're roughly double what we've got pledged on in relation to if it all comes in. So we've got 16 days to go. We all have to do what we can. I have prior experience of this with the CIRHPgate group, who we did a crowdfunder, and it needs a concerted effort with no complacency. It needs a number of people to boss it along, and I'm pleased to witness that that's what's happened. So let's take nothing for granted. Stick together, email your contacts, your family, get on social media, follow up in a few days, and basically harangue and cajole people. The personal touch, the phone calls is everything. So don't come off the call, for instance, without having a pledge and knowing what people are going to put in. Enough people do this, we will hit our target, and we cannot allow this opportunity to fail. So join with me, please, and do all you can. There's 40 people on here. Dig deep, and let's get this done and see the colour of their eyes. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ian. Well done for making your points in such a compelling way. You started reminding me of the Bob Geldof moment, you know, the just give us your money moment. And that really is what it boils down to. With the resources, we can get the job done. If the job gets done, there's a damn good chance of victory. And the systemic significance of that victory will ripple through everything in terms of the way the financial sector in the UK operates. And by the way, not just the UK, so much of the world looks up to the FCA for its supposed wonderful regulation. The ripple effects of this could be absolutely awesome. Can we please show appreciation to Ian Lightbody before we now move on to Andy Keats? Well done, Ian, thank you very much. And I'll tell you what, something for me which is always remarkably rewarding is the camaraderie and support and mutual recognition we get between different groups. It's lovely, for example, to just hear Ian Lightbody speak so supportively of Andy Keats and SME Alliance, etc., etc. That kind of dynamic is really what it means to work as a team. Let's put our differences to the side, agree what we agree on, and all go for it. Thank you very much, Ian. Mr. Andy Keats, thank you.
Yeah, hi there, everyone. For anyone who doesn't know me, I represent SME Alliance, and I think probably everyone knows what SME Alliance is doing and has done. Respect to, if I can just start actually with Andy Candy, something he said that really resonated with me and with SME Alliance in general. It's really important that when you receive information from lawyers, from the bank's lawyers, from the bank itself, from the BBRS, or whoever it may be, you actually check that what they say is correct. I deal with no end of misrepresented terms, an agreement, or they just expect you to think that that's okay. And I'll give you a quick example with the BBRS at the moment. BBRS came back on an eligibility assessment, and it's talking about its rules, and it talks about rule whatever it is, A, B, and D, and it doesn't talk about rule C, which is exactly the rule that helps that customer. It skirts around rule C. So people are either omitting completely rules and expecting you to go on without actually looking at them yourself, or they're actually amending terms, missing words at the beginning or the end that are pivotal and create the meaning for the term. So it's just something to be aware of, because I've got loads of examples of it. In terms of the 100 grand, that's what I'm here today to talk about. I mean, I think this is a really pivotal moment in banking complaints in general. As Ned said, you know, this litigation is going to be far-reaching. It's going to impact on the FCA and what they do and how they behave in the future. It's also going to therefore impact on complainants in the future. And there's a target of 100 grand, and I'm led to believe, I don't know, but that there's more 10,000 or more IRHP victims that haven't been reviewed to date. Well, 10,000 or more put in 10 quid each. My maths tells me that's 100 grand. Somehow we must make this 100 grand. It has to be there, especially when the compensation said between £1 and £3 billion. I mean, 100 grand is nothing, but we have to find a way of raising it. Now, I think the banks and the FCA are watching with real interest this fundraising effort. I honestly believe that if we don't succeed in this, we'll give back strength to the banks and to the FCA, carry on exactly as they have been carrying on all these years, on the basis that complainants complain, but they don't do anything else. When they could be claiming between £2-3 billion, They can't even be bothered to raise 100 grand towards it. So it's just a word really to say, come on, guys, we must do it. So to that end, by leading by example, I pledged £500 myself today. I've had no IRHP, had no borrowing whatsoever, and I was still taken out by the bank with no borrowing whatsoever in my business. So I think it's just so important that we realise this is a global complainants opportunity to move forward in a really significant way. And what we mustn't do is sit back and think, well, everyone else can do it, or it doesn't directly affect me. We have to pledge what we can. And that's the final point I want to make, is a pledge at this point. You're not actually you're not actually giving your money away at this point, you're pledging it. We all know that if the money isn't raised, as Ned said last time, you know, your money won't be taken. But having pledged my 500 this morning, I then phoned my dad, who's still around at 87 years old, and said, have you got anything, Dad? And he said, well, I'll give you 250 quid. So he's offering to repay me £250 of the 500 I've pledged. Now, I don't really want that, because I'll pledge the other 250 quid. But the point is, if you do want to make a pledge and you can't really afford it, as Ian said just now, go to friends, family, you name it. They don't have to pledge themselves, but they can pledge to you, and you can pledge to the the IRHPgate fundraiser. I think that's it. I don't want to say any more. Just we have to do this at all costs. We can't fail on this one. We must succeed.
Well done, Andy. Thank you very much indeed. Peter O'Donnell just put a note in the chat. How do you pledge? I've not yet made a pledge. I'm going to do it now. I wish I could afford to do a lot more than I'm going to do. I can afford to do £100. I'm going to do it now. And the reason I'm doing it now is just to literally show everybody just how easy it is. Please don't allow the decision in your mind to be, shall I pledge or shan't I pledge? Don't go there. Don't go in the territory of shall I do it or shan't I do it? Go in the territory of I'm going to do something. And then you decide whatever that number is right for you. Anything from whatever it is to whatever it could be. And please, everybody do their bit. But even more importantly than that, be proud about what you've done to help the cause and get everybody you know to do the same. There are two brilliant links. One is the link of Kevin Hollingrake MP that I showed earlier, and the other is the link to the webpage. Whack those two links into a post on LinkedIn, on Twitter. If everybody does this kind of thing, then it's going to make a real difference. So just to show you how easy it is to do, even if you don't know what the web page is, just go to Crowd Justice, which is just Google the word Crowd Justice. Crowd Justice, if I can spell it correctly, there we go. And then in the search bar at the top here, can you see the top of the search bar? Click on that, put in APPG, and it will come up. There's only one in there that comes up when you click on APPG. There's the case. The FCA must make banks compensate victims of financial mis-selling. That's what it's all about. You go there, you choose your amount. I'm going to pledge now. I guess I click on here. It seems pretty straightforward so far. I wish I could do a lot more than that. And please note, there is an other amount box there. So if you want to put in £20,000 rather than £2,000, you can, he says. If you want to put in less than 50 quid, you can. I'm going to choose £100 and I'm going to fill in the rest of the form and do it. I'm not going to do that with the screen open, obviously, but I promise you I am going to do it in just a second. While I'm doing that, we can go to Fiona, who's going to introduce herself and explain her perspective on this very, very important issue. Can we please go to Fiona? Thank you very much, Fiona.
Hello, everyone. I'm so impressed with what's going on here. It's absolutely fantastic and so good to see you all. Obviously, a lot of you know me already. And honestly, I'm just standing in for Kevin and Heather today, who can't make it. Just briefly, I'm a business person. I'm in property. My family and I were missold 7 tailored business loans back in 2007, 8, 9. And as a consequence of that, I ended up becoming a director of the campaign group Bully Banks many years ago, who were involved with talking to the FCA back in 2012, believe it or not. That is 10 years ago, guys. This is utterly ridiculous. So yeah, basically, you know, fighting alongside several of you for justice for fixed rate loan mis-selling victims for many years. Haven't got awfully far, but you know, that's my background, that's my bag, and that's why I am really passionate about this campaign now, because it's such a big knock-on effect on other mis-selling of other kinds, and also going forward for, you know, our children and our grandchildren's businesses in the future. The role of the FCA and the Treasury needs to be looked at much more closely. So yeah, when Bully Banks disbanded in about, I think 2017, something like that, myself, Heather Buchanan and Jackie Roberts got together and we created a not-for-profit company, which is now called the Athena Foundation. And the Athena Foundation basically provides what they call secretariat services. We're a non-profit organisation. I've never taken a penny in salary from anything, from Bully Banks or IRHPgate or anything. Now, basically, we provide secretariat services to running the APPG, and Heather is the one who is most closely involved with this, and Jackie and I are pretty much on the periphery, but you know, still keep in touch. So that's. We've had so many different chairs and co-chairs. They've all been fantastic. We started off with Gitto Beb, and now we've got Kevin who's leading the whole thing. So you know, it's such a massive group in Parliament. It's got such incredible cross-party support. It's just an absolute joy to be part of. Okay, so yeah, just sorry, I've just got a few notes because I sort of got involved with this at quite short notice. From my experience, I learned a long time ago that the government and its puppet, the FCA, will not look after you. You know, they deliberately, we know now, threw businesses under a bus, and they'll do it again if we let them. You know, so something like this initiative is so important just to stop that happening again. And, you know, I learned the only way to get any results is just fight tooth and nail and never give up. I mean, we all know of those cases where, you know, we all know what Doreen Lawrence did and the Hillsborough people and Nikki and Paul and all those people. And this is just more of the same. If the small people don't stand up, it just gets brushed under the carpet. I mean, like I say, 10 years it's been since the review was designed, and time is a weapon that is used against us all the time. You know, people die, people go crazy, people give up. I mean, I was helping to prepare a database just last week for emails to go out all about this, and it was so sad. We had to go through and delete so many lines of people who have died, who have committed suicide, or you just know can't deal with pursuing this anymore. It's just that the human toll is just quite unbelievable. So a lot of the points about what do we do now have already been covered by a lot of people, but I just wanted to focus on a couple of things. I really liked the term glide slope that somebody used earlier this week about making it look like it's going to be a successful campaign, because people won't pledge if they think that they're pledging for something that's never going to happen. And so I think it's really important that when we contact people, we actually say, no, don't wait till next week and see how the campaign goes to put your pledge in, put it in now. Because putting the pledge in now makes it look big. You know, that is just so incredibly important. We don't want people to think that they're involved in a failing campaign. So the urgency of this cannot be stated enough. So, you know, the time for action is now, the time for action is this week. And be proactive. I mean, people have said about sending emails, we've done that, and social media, fantastic, but there's no accountability there. Get on that phone. Whoever it was several people have said, get on that phone, follow people up. Obviously, every single 20 quid is vital in this, and that in itself helps to spread the word and increase the contributor numbers. But I have been trying to focus on people who I know survived and have got a few quid, but are still really angry. You know, we need high net worth individuals who still are furious about this and who still don't want this to happen to their children. And as I say, this is not just about these sophisticated excluded people. It's about mis-selling and mistreatment of customers and businesses across the board, in my view. The other thing, which I don't know whether anybody's done it or it's been mentioned yet, I think local newspapers, local radio. Has anybody done that at all? I mean, you know, we have a sort of mini media pack already, don't we? And we've got the crowdfunding page, we've got, you know, press releases, we've got information and Kevin's video. I just wonder if we're trying to reach these, as I say, these high net worth but still angry people, and just the only way to do that is to be very public with media, mainstream stuff, you know, the old fashioned things like newspapers, even online media sources. But anyway, that's just something I thought about. So yeah, that's it really. Just be proactive and get your people to be proactive themselves now. Don't leave it till next week. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you so much, Fiona. Thank you very much indeed. First time we've met, or I've seen you in person, as it were. So it's really great to have your input to today's session, Fiona. Thank you very, very much. Before we do anything else, can we please put our hands together to show all the speakers our appreciation for their input today? And then we'll go to kind of general Q&A and discussion. We're probably going to finish at 1:30. It seems like there's still quite a bit of energy around. If you're happy to stay and you want to carry on chatting, please do. So wave your hand at me if you'd like to come in with a thought, comment, question, idea. Please feel free to do that if you wish to do so. Otherwise, we will bring the session to a close. It's been, I think, a very, very focused session. We've had superb input from all of the speakers from beginning to end. It really has been excellent. I'm minded to organise another one of these next week as a bit of a catch up on proceedings. Could you just wave a hand at me if you think the idea of another meeting next week might be of interest to some of you? If so, I'll find a way of doing it time wise. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that. Okay, we'll throw it all together as we have done for this one, organised in very short notice, but I think the overall effect has been very, very positive indeed. Does anybody have anything they'd like to say before we wrap the session up? While you're mulling that over, I'll just say there's been remarkably brilliant stuff in the chat. I'll make sure it all gets circulated. And I think Ned was waving a hand at me just now. Ned, was that you?
Just to say thank you again for everybody, all the speakers, everybody attending, which is brilliant. And Andy, thanks very much to you for putting this all together, because it's brilliant to have you coordinating everything. So thank you.
Thank you, Ned. Well, allow me, if I may, just to sort of share my motivation for this. Some of you will know that I used to do something completely different for a living until I ended up creating the Transparency Task Force. And my entire purpose as a human being, beyond my family and other things that I obviously love, like all of us, my entire motivation has become dedicated to getting the financial industry to serve society. That is what needs to happen. We cannot have the kind of society we need if we have a financial sector that is exploitative. We cannot have the society we need and want if we have financial regulators that pull their punches with the banks when they should be going in hard. We cannot have the financial sector we need if there's a complete lack of personal jeopardy amongst the crookedly minded people running banks and other organizations. Remember what's happened here. Business people called bankers sat round tables in really expensive boardrooms have made decisions to basically sell stuff fraudulently. I've corrected myself. I'm no longer using that phrase, mis-selling. They have fraudulently sold stuff. They've behaved criminally. They've behaved inappropriately. They made business decisions to do that at the expense of society. We cannot have the society we want if we don't get the regulators to do their job properly. So to my mind, this is exactly like the following. It's exactly like seeing somebody, accidentally or otherwise scratch a car walking past the car and not bothering to put a note on the windscreen saying, so sorry, scratch your car, here's my phone number. You know, that would be the right thing to do. At the moment, the FCA has scratched somebody's car and said, stuff it, I'm not putting a note on the windscreen. That's wrong. It's exactly the same, to my mind, ladies and gentlemen, as children in a playground seeing a bully pick on another child and not say, oi, stop it, you should not be doing that, and getting stuck in, knowing you'll probably get beaten up by the bully, but knowing that your action of standing up rather than standing by is going to make it less likely that that bully is going to behave that way in the future. make no bones about it. We have a financial system that thinks it can get away with everything. You know why? Because it does. That's what has to change. Please don't forget the big picture significance of this case. If we want the financial industry to behave properly, we've got to make that happen. And if we stand by when we should be standing up, then that's what we're inviting to happen. Well, it couldn't be any simpler than that. So let's stand up rather than stand by. Do your bit. Whether you've got money or not doesn't matter. Make a contribution of some kind, but even more importantly, become a marketing professional, either voluntarily or otherwise, and do what you can to tell the rest of the world. We'll wrap it up on there, and I'll see you guys next week if you want to. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Well done, folks. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Cheers.